Welcome to the Old Ways for the New Age podcast, where we weave the threads of traditional living into the tapestry of modern day life. I'm Hannah Forrest, a herbalist and naturopath with a deep love for plants, seasons, and the quiet rituals that shape how we live and care for ourselves. This podcast is an invitation to slow down and reconnect with the wisdom of the natural world through herbal medicine, folklore, seasonal living, ritual, astrology, and simple earth-honoring practices that can be gently folded into everyday life. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. I wish to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and record, the Wonjarabara people. I honour their enduring connection to the lands, waters, and communities, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Hello, and welcome back to this week's episode. My name is Hannah, and this week I have the absolute joy of sharing a really meaningful, impactful conversation with you all. I sat down and had a conversation with Dana Aronson, who is the herbalist behind Wildkin Botanicals, and she resides in Southern Oregon. Dana and I really connected over the topic of mutual aid, which is something that I think not a lot of us, at least here in Australia, are familiar with as a term, but it's something that we all understand through our lived experience. And it's something that this modern world is really calling for more and more, which is the act of communities mobilizing and helping each other, people helping people in times of need to help us to build stronger, healthier societies, provide help to those in need when the existing power structures aren't offering that help. So I really think that this is an important conversation, and I think that it's one that you'll all really enjoy and take something away from. I also just wanted to introduce Dana. So Dana is a clinical herbalist, educator, and holistic practitioner. After her studies, she found herself facilitating herbal first aid pop-ups. These pop-up clinics provide herbal first aid and wellness to gatherings, to places that have been hit with natural devastation, and to working with folks who are unhoused and implementing harm reduction and wound care. Dana believes in offering accessible herbal medicines and transparent information, and she teaches in the classroom through one-on-one holistic sessions and through hands-on learning in the great outdoors. I know that you're going to fall in love with Dana's work just as much as I have, and I hope that you check out the show notes after the episode and find her social media, check out her website, and get engaged with her work. So without further ado, enjoy the episode, and I'll talk to you next time. Hi, Dana. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, yes. And I think it's so interesting how I kind of came across your page to begin with and the work that you do. But an Instagram follower of mine actually suggested you and suggested the topic we're talking about today, which is actually mutual aid. And I've fallen in love with your work and what you do. And I think that this conversation we're about to have is going to be very valuable, not only for my community, but for the greater herbal community. So for people who are meeting you for the first time right now, could you share a little bit about who you are and how you began on your herbal journey?
Yeah, totally. My name's Dana, and I grew up in Santa Cruz in California, and I now live in Oregon. And yeah, my background's in clinical herbalism, so I look through a clinical lens when working with people, but also I'm community based, right? So I'm really trying to understand where someone's at in their day to day. And herbalism found me in this very interesting way. I actually was going to school to become an sign language interpreter. So I was in school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was in school for American Sign Language, and I just moved to this big city, and I got fired from this yoga studio like 2 weeks in, and they wouldn't tell me what I did. And I was just so heartbroken. I was like 20 years old, or maybe 22 years old, just so sad. I was fired. It was my first time. And one day I got off school early and went into this herb store, and I was so fascinated by it, but at that point didn't really know anything about it. And it was this fortunate happenstance where the owner of the store was working that day. And we were just talking, and she was like, I'm actually hiring right now, and I'm looking for someone to work here. And I said, I'm super interested, but I don't know anything about any of that stuff. And she was like, it's totally okay. Like, I would be happy to teach you. And she was actually from Australia. And she was probably, I would say, like the first kind of herbal mentor that I had. And so I did that for a long time. And uh, after a little while, the calling came. I was like, I can't, this is my path. And so eventually, years later, I put myself through like a legitimate educational program, and interned at a low cost community clinic. And yeah, it kind of all shot from there.
I mean, I think that's amazing, just kind of how that happened for you and how someone kind of guided you there. That's not something you hear about a lot in that context, where you really just went into it with no clue and no interest in herbs and they found you anyway.
Yeah.
Um, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I love that you've relocated now to Oregon, but I know on your website you talk about growing up where the ocean meets the redwoods, which sounds
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
So would you say that the landscape in that region had any impact or influence over your sense of connection to nature and maybe even the way that you view healing now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I where do I start? I was really fortunate where I grew up, right? Just such a beautiful environment. And my mom has been there for since she was a little girl. And yeah, just being by this big energy of the ocean, and then also this grand energy from redwoods, which are some of the oldest trees, at least here on the West Coast. Um, and I was really fortunate. I grew up camping a lot. So my dad was, we were taking road trips, we were camping, we were outdoors a lot. And so I think all of that combined really instilled this love of nature, even when I was
Mm.
a little girl. So it wasn't necessarily herbal focus, but it was very much landscape focus. It was very much nature orientation, coming into contact with wildlife. When I was really young, I wanted to be a marine biologist because I just thought the ocean was so amazing and so grand. And then I took AP Bio and was like, this is not for me. But the thought of it, right? So again, just kind of that nature aspect of really, really finding beauty, and also a lot of like allure to it. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think that is something that I would have loved to grow up with a little bit more than I even did. But
Mhm.
definitely going camping as a child and getting immersed in those wild spaces
Yeah.
really has an impact on you, even in ways that I think when you're younger you just don't understand.
Yeah.
But it's something you appreciate so much more, especially when you do embark on a journey like herbalism and plant medicine. I think it is one and the same, right? This nature connection. We talk about like an observational practice a lot here on the podcast, and
Yeah.
how that is really like a devotional practice, and also, supports your work in all these other areas, being able to actually connect with the world outside your window, in a tangible, real way. So
Absolutely.
that's beautiful. And I'm about to visit redwoods for the first time. I've never,
Oh,
yeah, because they don't really grow in many places in Australia,
yeah.
but they do grow in Melbourne, and so I'm about to go and visit for the first time, and I'm really looking forward to it because there's just an incredible majesty about
Yeah.
them. It
They're
seems
so
so.
magnetic. So magnetic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they smell amazing too.
Oh, yes, very much so. So aromatic.
Oh, good. I'm so excited. And so I mentioned at the beginning that we're here to actually talk about mutual aid today. And this is a topic that I've realized isn't really, it's not a term that's used in Australia. And actually, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, my husband is Canadian and he also doesn't know the term mutual aid.
Yeah.
And I think when we break it down, I think I'll ask you to explain it in a moment. I think people will have like a bit of familiarity with it once they hear kind of what it is,
Yeah.
but it's not something that a lot of us are understanding in a like an organized, way where we're going out consciously looking to support mutual aid practices.
Yeah.
So I think that that's why I would really love to talk to you more about it, because it's valuable work. And I think the way that the world is going at the moment, life is really hard for a lot of people, and we're already practicing mutual aid in ways that we don't even realize, because our systems are not supporting us in the ways that we need them to, and they're not set up and designed to support us in those ways. So could you kind of explain a little bit about what mutual aid is, and kind of how herbalism acts as a service within that realm?
Yeah, totally. So, um, mutual aid is a very community based system. And kind of like what you mentioned earlier, of just like our larger systems at play aren't as supportive to our individual needs as much as we would like. So it's really just people supporting other people with shared needs. And I think the biggest thing here is there's no like hierarchical structure to that, and there's no profit that motivates this, and there's no like institutional gatekeeping, and it really is just people coming together to that have the same kind of shared outcome, or want the same shared outcome, and really putting our boots to the ground and using all of the resources that each individual can funnel in to give
Mm-hmm.
back. And I think, herbalism, at least for me, and kind of the ethos of herbalism is that it's people's medicine, right? It grows everywhere. People have access to it everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live, if you're in an urban area, if you're out in the country, if you're whatever state or country you're living in. And so that there is kind of that space where there isn't gatekeeping, right? It's like someone has the sovereignty to go out and pick the dandelion leaf, and it doesn't have to be paid for. It doesn't have to be FDA approved. And so with mutual aid work, it's really about giving what we can for the betterment of our community or communities, depending on just kind of that focal point in which you're at.
Yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that, and clarifying about that too. I really like the way that you said it's, basically people supporting each other in meeting their needs, and there's no external motivation, I guess, like no benefit to people other than supporting their community in ways that are essential and required in a very really real ways.
Yeah.
So I know like some spaces that you might be looking at mutual aid services being needed might be people who are unhoused,
Yeah.
and what other spaces like disaster relief.
Yeah.
What are some other spaces that people might see mutual aid being really beneficial?
Yeah, I disaster relief. So whether that's fires or flooding or tornadoes, depending on where you live, at least here in the states, right? Folks who are unhoused, so offering support there. I would also say like protests and things like that. Right
Mm,
now, we're in a space where there are a lot of protests in regards to our government and what it's deciding to do at the moment. And so supporting either people who are physically protesting, like on the front lines, or families that have been impacted. Um, yeah, I would say those probably come to mind most. And I know that, like, for me, I mainly have been in spaces of supporting unhoused folks, and then also disaster relief. So fires is a common one here on the West Coast.
and I want to give a little shout out too, because on your website you have amazing resources, and one of them is actually an ebook that I think you were a contributor, like a part of,
Yeah.
in regards to herbal support for protesters. So
Yeah.
I think that that's a really great resource. If people wanted to go look that up, you have that on your website for people
Yes.
to access easily.
Yeah, yeah, that's a free ebook that A few of my mentors actually and I all kind of put our brains together, all herbal folks, and um, support against police violence and protesting. So things around tear gas and the nervous system, et cetera, et cetera. And you can absolutely download that for free on my website.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And um, I know protests are actually ramping up here at the moment in Australia as well.
Mm.
Unfortunately, we tend to have less of the tear gas and more of just physical violence, which is
Mhm.
very difficult. But
Mhm.
um, I think still it's an amazing resource, and now people know it's there; they can go and find it.
Yeah.
And could you share what initially kind of drew you to these spaces, and why it kind of the work feels essential in the context of herbalism and healing? I know you kind of touched on that, but how did you get into working in mutual aid spaces in the beginning?
Yeah, I think as an ethos just within my day-to-day life, and not saying that I'm perfect or I'm holier than thou, but I do believe just as people in communities, we need to step up when it's time. And that can look so many different ways. That doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
be being on the front lines every time, or, maybe I have herbal background, but someone else has background in body work or massage. Like whatever your skill set is, I think um it's our responsibility to show up as. And I really got into this work, let's see, initially because of fire relief. So there were a few different fires that hit around the Bay Area where I was living, and one of them actually was in the town that my partner at the time, him and his mother, um, his mom was living there currently, but they lived in this town for a really long time. And we just felt like called to offer anything that we could because these people had one road in, one road out, and there was a lot of devastation and a lot of death. And
Mm-hmm.
just trying to figure out how, um, because we were more resourced in the sense of we weren't technically threatened by this fire, like how could we show up and just support? And so that looked like um, calling up places, churches, Elks Lodge, yeah, different, mainly, yeah, church and the Elks Lodge were really the ones that came through and that were receptive to us. But we were setting up tables with herbal teas, and we just asked our greater communities if anybody wanted to pitch any money or donations. And so we just kind of acquired all of this from so many other people. It wasn't just us. We were just kind of the vessels of getting it up there and then displaying it on a table and trying to interface with people. And I think that's, having those interactions really do something to your heart and to your soul. And it's hard to turn away from that once you've been impacted.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we've had quite a few natural disasters here in my sort of region over
Mhm.
the last several years, basically since I moved up to the mountain here.
Mm.
And so some of them have been off the mountain. There was massive flooding in
Yeah.
areas where also they wouldn't insure against flooding, so no one had insurance, and that was really devastating. Like towns and towns just gone. And on the mountain where I live, like around my house, thankfully we didn't have too much damage, but there was a freak out of nowhere tornado and a
Mm,
cyclone within 18
mm,
months of each other, which
mm,
had never happened ever in this
mm.
area before.
Yeah.
And our mountain is pretty isolated, and so people actually went without power, water, and septic for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
An entire mountain of people, which is still quite a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that was an amazing display of people coming together and supporting each other in ways that they needed the help. And so people were just camping in their houses or in their yards
Mhm.
if their houses weren't safe anymore because they didn't have roofs or stuff had fallen onto their homes. And because, yeah, there's no town water,
Yeah.
there was no toilets or anything for 2 whole weeks for this whole community of people.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were people helping with generators. There were people offering up their homes that hadn't been damaged. People there were body workers and healers and naturopaths and people coming together and offering free services,
Yeah.
and holding clinics. And that was just an amazing display of a community really coming together.
Yeah.
So it's really powerful when you see people mobilize themselves like that and just really lend a hand to those in need. And I think um, the way that everything is unfolding now, we're seeing it more and more because, again, people aren't, there's no systems that are going to support them.
Yeah.
And people's needs collectively, I think, are higher at the moment than they ever really have been in really dire ways. So we're seeing more of this happen because people are stepping up. Like, as you said, once you kind of start to see, you know, what happens when people are in a space of need, it's hard to look away and to unsee it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I think there's like a spectrum to it too, because, like, for an example, with fire relief, like FEMA sometimes will come in depending on the extent of the fire. And, that's a government system, but they aren't showing up day one after, fires.
mm,
They're usually a couple weeks out. And so, we as people within our community have a faster reaction time as well, which I think is also really needed. Like, sure, I can't do the work of FEMA. Like, I don't have, money to give you per se, but I can offer, yeah, my education and my resources of what I have, to help, in the time frame,
yeah, yeah. And I like reflecting on it too. Do you feel like this is more of like a renaissance of this kind of work in the sense that our ancestors would have lived more tightly in a community and more like interwoven into community than we do now? And this is really us just kind of reclaiming the support of each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. At one point, we were all living in smaller societies and communities and relied on each other so much more. And now we live in a very, at least talking from the States, we live in a very individualistic
Mm,
society, and a lot of us are tied down to our homes or doing remote work. And there is this disconnect, and there is, regardless if we're conscious of it or not, there is this kind of biological craving of community, because that
yeah.
is within our DNA as humans. And you're right. I think there's a surge of that because the pendulum swings, right? So it's like, I think we've been so disconnected for so long and so individual in our experience that now the pendulum's starting to swing back a little bit and being like, wow, this actually is really important for so many things, so many things.
Yeah.
And I think people are starting to wake up to that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Definitely food for thought for a lot of the listeners too, I'm sure. I know like when these disasters happen, people were reflecting in the local Facebook group for those who had access to internet. Some people went off the mountain. There were different contexts, but um, that so many of them didn't even know who their neighbors were.
Right.
And like we live in a pretty small community up here, and I would say, like, as far as it goes, we're a pretty tight knit community already, but there are still so many of us who have never at least spoken to our neighbors, don't know their names. And so I think it's definitely time that we start to reconnect and re-engage with these communities that we even like just live in, let alone the greater community. Um,
Absolutely.
and so you've done a lot of work with organizations as well. So I'd love to hear a bit more. You do a lot of herbal first aid specifically,
Mhm.
which is something I have just admired so much about your work. It's such an interesting field for me. I think herbal first aid is one of those things where, like, again, if you have a really serious chronic disease, or maybe you're like you've just chopped an arm off, we want
Mhm.
medical help, right? Like, I think there's space for both. But there are so many little things too that we can, or perceive little things that we can work with herbal medicine, as the first port of call. And herbal first aid is one of those areas, I think, where we can work and lean on the plants around us to help with like a scrape, or a burn, or like a twisted ankle or a cold or things like that. And so you volunteered with people like organizations like MASH, so that's Medicine for All Seeking Health and Healing, Curbside Care Clinic in Oakland, and the KSHA Clinic in Southern Oregon.
Mhm.
Um,
Could you speak a little bit about what working in those environments has taught you about kind of care, accessibility, and like what people are facing when they need support?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So, a lot of these groups or spaces that I've found myself in have very much been grassroots. Like MASH,
Mm.
that was started by Greta, and she is based in Northern California, and she started MASH almost 20 years ago, and kind of with this,
Wow.
similar viewpoint of showing up to protests and supporting environmental justice work, et cetera, et cetera. And but yeah, with curbside care, it was just one of my mentors and I, and we didn't even actually have a name to call us at that point. It's since grown, but when we first started, we specifically were offering first aid to unhoused folks, so people who had wounds. And specifically, there was a local nonprofit called Punks with Lunch, and they were a needle exchange program. And so they shared that they were seeing a lot of people with open wounds in regards to IV use, and if we were open to setting up alongside them and offering care. And so that very much looked like wound care. And then with KSHA, that's again just a few of us here locally in Southern Oregon, and we came together during a big fire that happened during COVID, and it annihilated almost two little towns, that were in close proximity, and completely, yeah, torched those to the ground, unfortunately. And so I think, there's so much that comes with this. There's so much learning that comes with this type of work. One is that there is a sweetness that comes with collaboration. So, again, like coming out of this individualistic framework and really honing in our skills as a collective group, however many people are involved, and learning from one another. And then that also then mirrors care to the person that we're supporting, getting the best care possible, right? It's not just one mind coming at this problem, it's a few minds coming at this problem. And yeah, I think first aid, there's also things around herbal first aid that's really cool. With herbal first aid, it's acute support. So a lot of times you see things happen quickly, right? But when you're working, like when I work clinically, sometimes we're working with chronic issues that have been, holding on for 5, 10 years. And sometimes that shift is a little bit of a slower process. But with first aid, using an herb like yarrow can stop bleeding within a minute or two. And you see that
Mm.
actively happening. And I think with first aid, it really does kind of hone in this kind of the sovereignty of knowing and confidence of knowing how to help yourself. Again, if you cut off your arm, like, yeah, go to the ER. Like, that's what they're there for. Like, please.
Yeah.
But yeah, not having to rely on those larger systems for smaller things. And a lot of people, sure, we have access to the ER, but a lot of people in the States are having a really hard time with medical insurance. And it's so
Mm.
expensive that people are choosing not to go anymore or not to get in the ambulance because you have a 10, 20, $30,000 bill from just riding in an ambulance.
Yeah.
And so I think with these tools, through first aid, again, burn, scrape, sting, it can kind of give you confidence to support yourselves. And it was also a really, really big, um, it was a really big learning experience that I didn't quite understand, specifically in regards to curbside, where we were working with unhoused folks, and a lot of them just shared like the stigma around being unhoused or the stigma around
Mm.
using drugs and not feeling comfortable to go to the ER, not feeling comfortable to like, a story was like, they got stabbed and got stitches and lost their medication, or it got stolen or something like that, and they didn't feel comfortable going back to the ER to try and request more medications because the way that they were treated. And so I think it was just really humbling as someone who has never experienced being unhoused. To it was just another layer of like reasoning why people don't seek medical care, you know? And so I think all of these little things that I just explained, all of these filter back into my experience with first aid. And with things like MASH, and other kind of projects. We do first aid at like herbal gatherings or symposiums or like what are they calling them, like Skillshare gatherings. And so again, it's just a learning hub for people, like, oh, you have
Mm,
poison oak, like, let me share with you what can be really beneficial, and maybe when you go home, like, use this or pick this up, so next time you get poison oak, you have an avenue of trying to heal it quicker.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really powerful. Thank you for sharing all of that. And that is really intense work too with the curbside care. Like that sounds like that was a really big experience. And I think what's amazing kind of about one aspect of what you're saying is this like active collaboration with other herbalists too, providing a learning foundation, not only for the person that you're caring for and like better care for them, but also more education and more insight for you as a practitioner.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe an aspect that I hadn't considered. But we talk a lot about on here about how, you know, mentorship was originally how herbalism kind of came about. People would have been mentored, they would have been taught by an elder, they would have been watching people work with plants as they grew up. And now, especially here in Australia, it's very clinical. That's not the same in the United States, and I want to talk about that. And there's a reason why I'm engaged so much with North American herbalism versus Australian herbalism. I think Australian herbalism is great and the herbal community is great, but it is, for the large part, very clinical here. Like,
Hmm.
more a step below the naturopathic doctor program from Canada, but everything is evidence based now. We work on an evidence based model. And a lot of practitioners now won't even work. I applied for a job and decided definitely wasn't for me because she was like, oh, I see you work with flower essences. We don't do that here.
Mm,
Because there's not enough evidence to support their use.
right.
And so that's the approach. And it's a bachelor degree is what I did. That's the standard now.
Yeah.
And so like the minimum of what you're expected to do to be a practitioner. And it's very clinical. It's very like we have subjects taught by medical GPs, and so we do biology, chemistry, biochemistry, like all of these anatomy and physiology subjects, and pharmacology subjects, and
Right.
all of those kinds of things. And so we've lost the soul of herbalism here in that way. And in an episode I just recently did with somebody, it was actually with Claire Murray, it was just released. It like we talk about how you can go through the entire degree, which is minimum 4 years, and never touch a plant, not
Right.
once.
Right.
And that is so mind blowing when you think about, like, if this is medicine we're working with, is actual plants, and we have no idea how to identify them, what they, smell like, what they taste like. Sometimes we've never tasted a plant other than maybe the tincture version, or perhaps a tea. And when I'm talking about teas, it's very weak, like basic teas as well. And so like your experience really hinges on the person teaching you at the time for your subject, but even then they're limited by the boundaries that are in place. And so we miss so much. And I think a lot of us who are kind of soul-led practitioners or kind of heart-led practitioners come out of it going, something's missing. And then
Yeah.
we have to go on this journey of like unlearning and relearning what a herbal practice actually looks like and how it plays a part in our own lives and also our wider communities and just in our relationship with the plants. And
Absolutely.
some of us just go down we graduate, and I have friends who just go straight into clinical practice, and that's what they do, and they use a lot of supplements, and that's their approach. And then I know some people who've gone kind of down a similar path to me, where we're reincorporating the energetics and the psycho spiritual stuff. And it's just really interesting. how much, like how far it's been separated from, say, like the practices that you guys have in North America. And
Yeah.
it's been such a gift to actually be able to go over and be a part of those herbal spaces where people really like focus on, the why am I having a mental blank? Uh, Basically being able to the botany, being able to identify a plant in the wild and like what makes it different from this variety of plant, um, and just the folk kind of knowledge and the sharing and herbal spaces where people are doing what you said, where like there's herbalists coming together and maybe there is herbal care, and like that wouldn't necessarily be a part of a herbal experience here. Most of the time they're in conference centers
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
catered lunch. And that's what they're like. There's only really a couple of more grassroots ones that I'm involved with that offer kind of a similar experience. And even then, it's definitely one of them is definitely more like kind of people speak on a stage and so it's just a different landscape here. And I think that opportunity to kind of learn from and bounce off of other practitioners really up levels your own practice, because
Absolutely.
we again weren't meant to work in isolation, and
Absolutely.
there's so many like tips and tricks, and like you learn from people's real lived experience, and anecdotal evidence. I want to write about this is still evidence.
Totally. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think like, thank you for sharing that, because that speaks so much to so many layers of herbalism. But at least here in the States, we aren't governed by any governing body. So federally
Hmm.
we're not governed, and by state we're not governed. And so there's always pros and cons to each side, that being like this, being in the States or versus kind of where you are in Australia. But there is this really beautiful aspect of not being board certified, where we have a lot of leeway to
Mm.
share and recommend herbs in the way, that pertains to our scope of knowledge. So evidence-based herbalism is really important, and also psychospiritual flower essences, energetics of plants, getting your hands dirty with the plants is also a certain type of medicine that you can't get at other places. And I think we're so used to the modern pharmaceutical world of like, just take the pill that looks white, doesn't have any taste. In 30 minutes, your symptoms will go away. And of course, there's always space for that. But also, herbalism is not that. So trying to put it in a box like that, in my opinion, doesn't do it justice, and also doesn't do the body or the human experience with these plants, this relating to plants, it doesn't do it justice. And
Hmm.
with first aid, I was really lucky that I was the first aid clinic I ever worked was for this gathering in Oregon. And I can't remember how many people were at this gathering, probably like 20,000 people or something like that.
Wow.
It was huge. And I met this woman, Dea Pauline from Grassroots Apothecary, and she took me under her wing and really showed me the ropes. And she's been doing this way longer than I have. And she was the one that kind of brought me in, and she absolutely was a mentor of mine and really believed and supported me in my learning. And I am so forever thankful for her, which again just kind of trickled down and led to more and more things, as time went on. But first aid was absolutely a mentorship for me. And there was this space where I was in, where I had the privilege to just volunteer. I was volunteering. I wasn't making any money. I was showing up. I was like learning the thing because I just couldn't get enough of it. And
Mm.
yeah, there's something really special to say about that, because with anything, right? We could talk about first aid plants all day, but
Yeah.
until you start implementing them or learning, same with herbalism. Like once you actually start embodying the practice and doing the practice in real time, that's where the true knowledge comes in.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, when we have this great divide between the two, I guess, system schools of herbalism. Like we kind of have the more grassroots approach, and then we have the more clinical approach. I think there's a lot that gets missed in the middle, and that's when we have people saying things like, uh, white willow bark is the same as aspirin.
Right.
And, I have literally someone I know who's in her 80s, and she texted me something the other day about how amazing it is that we have these plants that work exactly like pharmaceuticals. And it was a list. And I like it, they don't work like that.
Yeah.
So, it does, as you said, it does a huge disservice to the plants. Because that's not how they work. It never has been how they work. They don't work in isolation. It's like
Right.
pulling curcumin out of turmeric and expecting it to work the same. It just doesn't. And so, yeah, I think it's amazing. And herbalists are so generous too with their wisdom. So if we can create more herbal spaces and opportunities for our elders and, those more experienced than us to be able to share that knowledge, they want to share it, because look at that ripple effect that it had with
Yes.
you. Like by teaching you her skills, some of them, you were able to go out and help so many other people
Yeah.
in all these different ways.
Yeah.
And that's just incredible. And it gives me shivers to think about, like, just
Yeah.
how that spreads, in a really positive way.
Yeah. It's the pushback of gatekeeping,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
this information is for everyone and is applicable for everyone. And we should do our part in sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, is there a moment or like a story from your volunteering that has really stayed with you or continues to shape your approach to healing and
Mm.
herbalism today?
Mm. Yeah, I think gosh, is there one story specific? Um I think you know, I would say one that comes to mind in regards to first aid kind of mobile mutual aid work was when we were my partner at the time and I were setting up and offering herbal tea to folks. And so this is fire based, lots of smoke in the air, people's nervous systems are heightened, fleeing from fire.
Mm.
And this is a community that I wouldn't say it wasn't herbally inclined, but it was just a little bit more foreign to a lot of these people that we were helping. And so the local co-op donated a whole bunch of throat coat from Traditional Medicinals. They're an herb-based company here in the States. And we just were brewing that into tea and putting it in Cambro. And this one older man came up, what do you guys do? What are you guys doing? What do you guys have? Da, da, da. He was sharing about how he lost his everything, except him, his dog, his son, and his car to get down the road. And I was kind of sharing what was in this Cambro and talking about the herbs and talking about kind of the effects of smoke, and he was really suspicious. He was like, I don't know about this. And I was like, it's all good. It's here if you want any, like no pressure. And he ended up taking a cup and then not hanging around too much and leaving. Turns out he loved this cup of tea and like brought all of his homies that were like waiting in line over to this tea. And he was like, it's crazy to tell you that this tea actually helped me. Like my throat feels so much better and it's less dry and less scratchy. Like I'm amazed. And I think like that was impactful for me because I think sometimes in the herb world, at least in my own herb world, like I'm around a lot of herbalist and plant people and people who maybe aren't even herbalists but are just more receptive to herbs or have had them in their day-to-day lifestyles. But
Mm.
to really share space with someone that's very skeptical of herbs and how they maybe work, to have that aha moment, especially in a time of disaster and just kind of this light that came into his face. And yeah, this time of devastation was um truly humbling, and also just like solidifying like plants do their work, like I didn't
Yeah.
know any of that. I just brewed the tea,
Yeah.
like got the donation and stuck it in some hot water and gave a cup
Mm.
out, and just seeing how plants can impact people, even if they're not plant people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really is moving, because I think also it's amazing to see people have that first experience with plants, and they really work. Herbs really work. And sometimes I think I you know I wonder, I'm like, is this just me? And then you get to see someone have that experience for the first time, and like their whole world changes, whether they realize it or not in that moment. Whether they go on to become herbalists or whether they just integrate herbal tea into their life for the rest of their days and
Yeah.
share it with a neighbor. Again, that ripple effect, the way that it can spread something positive through communities that really need it, is so beautiful. And
Yeah.
I think that throat coat, that's an original Rosemary recipe, isn't it? I
Yes.
think,
Yeah.
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 Um,
And it was also so cool because then I was able to be like, this isn't some crazy blend that I, formulated
yeah.
that we'll never be able to find. It was like, look at this box of tea, like be
Mm,
receptive and like clock this box of tea, because you can find this in a Walmart at this point, Target, you can find this at any grocery store. So it was also kind of this moment of like, you too can obtain this and integrate it into your life or integrate it into this moment. And it was, I think that's also part of the empowerment that happens. It's like, oh wow,
yeah.
I can buy this at whatever store wherever I am and get this relief. Like now they have that tool in their toolbox.
And I think that this brings us to a really important topic that I would love to touch on a little bit, and that is accessibility.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one thing that's really important. In these spaces with the age of the internet,
Yeah.
there's a lot of influence and people have opinions because opinions sell. And whether those opinions are right or not, or informed or not,
Yeah.
if we're not going to work on a binary like that, whether they actually have experience backing them up. Because this is one thing that grinds my gears, and people don't really understand it when I get on a rant about it. But, I do think that people on the internet, yes, everyone should be able to change their minds, but also, um, yes, and if you will, I
Mm.
think people also do have a personal responsibility if they're going to share about something. And so, there's so many influencers, or what have you, people who do the internet for their job, who share about something and then completely change their mind 6 months later.
Yeah.
And people have started working with that plant in a certain way, or ingesting essential oils, or whatever it is. And then people change their minds, and it's like, it's okay to change your mind, yes, but also making things accessible for people is really important. And that's not so much to do with the having an opinion as much as people, even a workshop I went to, which was beautiful, and I know the people who run the farm, and it was great. But she was saying, like, there's no point in making herbal teas from things that you haven't grown and harvested yourself. She's like, I don't offer it for sale. I don't offer my herbs for sale in tea form to anyone. I only keep them for myself. In terms of the tea, she's like, I'll make it into oils and salves and things that are more stable. But because plants lose their potency being dried, over time,
Mhm.
it's just a waste. And I just, part of me understands that, because I got to see her plants, and
Yeah.
I got to see her dried herbs and the oil that it made, and it was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that doesn't make things accessible for people. And I
Totally.
still think that there's medicine in a herbal tea that you can buy from the store.
Absolutely.
And this judgment zone of, we need to be, perfect
Yeah.
at herbalism to be able to work with it in any way that's going to make any sort of difference
Yeah.
is just false. And it's harmful for people, because how many people could, have positive effects in their lives, and, be more empowered to be an active participant in their own health journey if they felt like they had permission to just experiment, which is what it's all about, and learn and try different things, and also just pay what they can afford for
Yeah.
something, and be able to get something by easily walking into a grocery store, or getting some tea that a friend doesn't want anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that stuff is important too. Do you have anything to say on, I'm sure you do, on accessibility?
to say. My opinion is I'm not down with that. No, um, yeah, I think the wellness world that kind of correlates into herbalism, they kind of overlap. I think there can be this very washed version of herbalism. So, really beautiful, impeccable, like white dress with like the really fancy, really pricey herb shop. And it's like, yeah, all of that exists and there is space for that. But that's just not reality. And when I teach, so I teach for an herb school, Berkeley Herbal Center. So when I teach these students that are in these programs, I'm always saying like there is a perfect world and there is reality, right? So in a perfect world, as an herbalist, I would love to grow all of the herbs that I want to ingest and grow all the medicinals that I want. But the reality is, I don't live somewhere right now where I have a lot of garden space. Maybe you
Mhm.
live in an urban area where you don't even have a backyard. So it's like, I think when we make those judgments and those kind of like binary, it's this or that, it really can deter people from wanting to look into herbalism more. And I have a big problem with that because, again, herbalism is people's medicine. And I don't know if you've ever lived in a food desert, but from my understanding, like it's not that great. Like people don't have access to a co-op. I used to live in a part of Oakland where like you could find a corner store real quick, but to actually get to a grocery store was a jaunt. So if you don't have modes of transportation, it's going to take
Mhm.
you a minute and really take time to get to a grocery store. So, it's like finding herbs or foods in, for an example, a grocery store or a corner store are absolutely medicinal and you should absolutely use them. And I think accessibility in herbalism is what herbalism is. It's
Yeah.
not about this like trendy thing. It's not about this high price ticket thing. It's not about like product that you have to
Yeah.
pay hundreds of dollars for. It's like, nah, I'm not about it. And not to knock anyone's hustle, like there's room for it
Yeah.
all, but I think it's inaccessible for people. And I think that's why mutual aid calls to me. That's why giving out free resources calls to me. That's why, you know, teaching a free 1 hour workshop calls to me because it's like this needs to be accessible for people. Of course, I need
Mhm.
to live and pay my bills and I do need to charge for things, but again, I think it comes down to duty and responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's all feeding into like this massive perspective shift that needs to happen because I know even in my own life, my husband does not understand it. He does not get the give back. He doesn't get wanting to give away services for free or, and I've done that a
Yeah.
lot. Any of my clients know you don't get away without getting freebies and extra time because I can't help myself. But also, I think, we also need to really value herbalists
Yeah.
and be able to support them in ways that allow them to be resourced to do this work. It's
Absolutely.
circular, it should be circular. So
Yeah.
instead of going I can't, I would rather buy my designer shoes, invest your money in somebody who's giving back to their community so that they can live and eat, um, and do the work that like lights them on fire in a good way and that they feel like they're here to do on this earth, and we can create stronger, healthier communities for that.
Absolutely.
um so it's just this shift that needs to happen. And again, we're not knocking anyone's hustle because obviously these are also opinions. It's more just like we all need to acknowledge that no
Yeah.
matter where we are, whether it's the internet or at a herb conference or chatting to someone at the grocery store, we all have personal responsibility
Yeah.
and we need to honor that and really take that into account when we are speaking with people, because it can also be just really hard to be having conversation with someone who internally might be really struggling in their life with something, and then you're like, oh yeah, that tea's crap. And they're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that I just spent my last $5 on that, like
Right. I think
you know
Rosemary Bloodstart spoke to this beautifully with Fire Cider, which
yeah.
I hope a lot of maybe your listeners have at least heard of. But it is like one of the quintessential understandings of like food as medicine. And to make fire cider, you can get every single ingredient at a grocery store, you
I love
know?
that.
that it's like you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars for herbs, you know, or medicinal foods. It's like they're
Yeah.
at the grocery store. Your spice cabinet has so much medicinal value. It's
Yeah.
just the education, like learning about it and understanding when to use certain things and understanding the medicinal value that it brings. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I think at the end of the day, knowledge is power, right?
I say that. It's like one of my life's mantras. The more you know, the more empowered you are. Is
True.
like I say that to everyone all the time, and it's so true. And I think for anyone who's listening who has a herbal tea that they want to use, and you've had it for a year, I highly doubt our ancestors threw out all their herbs on an exactly 12-month cycle.
Right, right.
Um, but the more we're able to share this information and like educate people in accessible ways, the more you can know how to turn that parts of that tea into a salve before it goes, it loses too much of its potency, and have it be more stable medicine for you. So it's all this like cycle. And if we can just feed into it in important ways,
Yeah.
the world will be better for it. So obviously this kind of work is, it would have an impact on your emotional health, and it would have actually an impact on your physical health.
Yeah.
So what are some ways that you care for yourself doing this kind of work so that you don't
Mm.
burn out, essentially?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm still not perfect at these things that I implement, but I think generally speaking, herb wise, I'm using a lot of nervines and nutritive plants in daily teas or tinctures on the go. And that's just a nice baseline to start with. And outside of the herb world, um, I would say two practices that are really important for me are sleeping. So actually quieting myself in my own energy and space, um, to really be able to gain enough sleep to feel rejuvenated in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And another one for me, and I actually found this practice when I was doing the wound care clinic in Oakland. I had this really disturbing interaction on a lot of different levels that I won't get into, but it really shocked my nervous system. And this was very early on too. So I was still learning just how to be in a space like this. And that really poignant experience, I went home and immediately got in the shower. And it wasn't because I felt dirty or anything like that. It was like, oh, water is so cleansing energetically for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I shower often in times like this. And I don't want it to sound like I'm taking 30-minute, hour-long showers. I'm washing my hair every time. This is like 2 minutes. I'm not,
Yeah.
again, I'm not showering because I feel dirty or I am dirty. It's just like that moment of like letting water run over you and like really grounding into that. Maybe if I lived on a river once, so I'd go down to the
Exactly.
river, so like depending on what water source you have, but
Yeah.
it really was a way for me to ground out quickly. And after that experience, I'm like, oh, whoa, water is, at least for me, really beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And boundary energetic, using plants energetically in regards to boundary plants, making sure that my energetic bubble feels solid and safe and grounded while I'm coming in contact with a lot of different things that can be, like you said, draining, and really
Yeah.
working with plants energetically.
And so, do you have a couple of go-to plants for boundaries? I would say yarrow is probably one of them.
Yeah, yarrow is a great one. I honestly like to use, which isn't, it's ocotillo is one that I
Okay.
like to use. It's a desert plant, so it actually doesn't grow where I live. But I really love ocotillo for boundaries. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yarrow always I carry around because it's such a great first aid plant as well. I just tend to always have yarrow too. But I really
Mm-hmm.
love ocotillo because if you've ever seen ocotillo in the desert, it's a stunning plant. It's this big, expansive, kind of gangly plant that shoots out and has these beautiful bright red fiery tips.
Right.
the flowers, and then they this plant has spikes like you won't believe. And so
Okay.
and visually it's a boundary plant, right? Like you have to be really
Yeah.
careful around it. But I just have always really felt called to that plant. So I use that one a lot for boundaries. I do.
Oh, thank you. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I have to look up if there's a common name for ocotillo other than what you've just said, because I'm not sure it's a plant we have here, but I know yarrow is definitely accessible for people in Australia and in the UK as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I think, other ones that I tend toward like that are in my vicinity are rose. Rose is a great one.
yes, I love
Um,
rose.
because it can be really supportive in kind of keeping that tenderness and heart open, but also kind of that
Mm,
boundary around that can also be helpful, which also grows in most places in the world.
yes, and
Yeah.
also has thorns. Yeah. um, so for people who are listening who are kind of herbalists, naturopath students, herb curious, and maybe they want to start getting involved with their community in a mutual aid capacity, do you have any advice or suggestions on ways that they can start to embark on that journey?
Mm, mm. Yeah, I guess I can just speak from my own experience of just trial and error. I've always been in spaces where it's a very small group of people, which I do find in a way is great to start with, right? If there's too many cooks in the kitchen to start with, sometimes it can get really muddled. So whether or not that's just you or maybe a core group of people, um, I would start there. But really, yeah, good question. How would I share this? I think less is more a lot of times. I think we can get really stuck on all the things that we need or all the things theoretically that we want to do that almost stymies us from actually doing it. And so, in a lot of these spaces, initially just showing up with a table and some herbal tea or some
Mm,
tinctures that you can blend up for folks. And really, there doesn't have to be a lot of glitz or a lot of glamour. And it can just really be, especially when you're first starting out, interfacing with the people around you who are coming up and trying to gauge what their needs are or what the ask is, because I think that's also a part of mutual aid is very much listening, right? We're not
mhm.
necessarily wanting to come with our own agenda because we're helping people. So the people that we're trying to offer support to, how about they need, instead of me just expecting. So really listening, I think, and less is more. So I'm always a big fan of outsourcing donations. So is in need for XYZ, pulling out, seeing if people have funds to help funnel that in so it doesn't come out of your pocket, or like you can't pay for everything is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Trying to access funds other ways. And, yeah, I think that would be some of my sharing.
And would you say, like, obviously starting, I think that's really good information to start with, maybe just like a few people or a couple of people. But in the same vein, along the same vein, would you suggest that people go with another person when they're setting up tables just for, like, because you're by yourself? Is that something or have you gone and done things completely by yourself before?
I haven't actually. It's always been me and another person or a
Mm,
few more other people. And you're right. I think that's the part of like teamwork, right? It's like it's
yeah.
nice to bounce ideas off of. It's nice to show up and come together and also just trying to figure out what do you see or what are you hearing and just kind of having a soundboard, which is really nice. And yeah, so like, places, it doesn't necessarily have to be disaster relief. I think sometimes that can be like just generally understood of what's needed, generally speaking. But some people, will set up in parks where there's maybe an unhoused community and just creating conversation and rapport and seeing if anyone needs anything or is asking for anything. Um, or also coming together with other organizations like with Curbside, there was a nonprofit that we kind of paired next to, so every time they popped up we popped up, and so we kind
Yeah.
of tackled it in that way.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And in the spirit of accessibility as well, providing resources for people like you are with the ebook on protests, like herbal care for
Yeah.
protesters, like providing things like that might be an option for people as well, something that isn't behind a paywall where people can just
Right.
access it if they need it, and it's really basic but valuable information. That could be really great too, I think.
Totally.
Because again, in a world where it's finding that line, isn't it, between wanting herbalists to be resourced because we need to be, but also not gatekeeping information that could really improve people's lives.
Right.
So I do think sometimes like the sliding scale and those kinds of things
Yeah.
are good. So if people can't afford it but need the information, they can access it. And the sliding scale is not so big here. But yeah, then for people who can afford it, like, I wholeheartedly encourage you to find a way to compensate a herbalist if you can, because a lot of us have like donation links, or
Yeah.
buy me coffee, or we
Yeah.
have a Substack you can support, or like that kind of avenue as well. um
Yeah, and some people want to support and don't know how to. And
mhm.
maybe they're not the people that can or want to be on the front lines. And so sometimes they will donate to the cause in regards to like, can I just donate, a couple $100, and can that just support you in this work for set amount of time? Where it's like you're not making money per se, but it's supporting the work
Yeah.
longer term. And
Mhm.
because you're right, mutual aid does have to be some sort of exchange, because again, right, we all have bills, we all have to live. um, you know Rent's due at the first of the month, water, like what's going on with you? So there is this like dance that we have to do. When I was younger, for an example, not that I'm that old, but like, when I was like, more fluid in my schedule, I had so much more volunteer time. Where right
Yeah.
now, my schedule, it's really hard to volunteer free time right now. So I choose to just volunteer in other ways, like offering a
Mhm.
free resource or something like that. So the, it looks different for everybody, but these are just some ways that we can still offer mutual aid without having to be on the front lines all the
Yeah,
time.
I like that about the donating as well. And even if you're a herbalist who maybe, like, I'm a mom of a young child and I'm a full-time mother
Yeah.
as well as working. So like me being able to like get out and volunteer right now is not going to work. But I
Right.
could donate herbs
Right.
or tinctures, or like even things in that way. Like if I have stuff I'm not using, or I made extra, or I can donate that to somebody.
Yeah.
We have a free clinic in the Northern Rivers area here, which is one of the areas that was really significantly impacted by flooding, and there was a
Mhm.
herbalist who set up a herbal clinic, and I believe it's still running,
Oh,
where people can just go certain days of the week and just access herbal care.
cool.
And so they were asking and still ask for donations of like herbal products and tinctures, and like bottles for dispensing, and like even that kind of stuff is really helpful. So
Yeah.
there's always something people could find to do to get involved in some way, even if it's not them like boots on the ground, actually the people administering care. um,
Yeah. And I think that's
mm,
important, because I think a lot of times when people think of mutual aid, like it's like if I'm not on the front lines, like I'm not doing anything. And I think it's really important to know that there's so many avenues and everyone
mm,
has different capacities. And it's like just because you can't be on the front lines or can't, don't have space to set up wherever, doesn't mean that
yeah.
you still can't give in whatever ways you can. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, as a last little fun question, do
Yeah.
you have any plants that you feel really connected with? We love a plant spirit story. We
Mm.
love like knowing if there's a plant ally that you have that's really sacred to you that pops up for you a lot.
Mm.
Do you have one of those friends?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many.
It's
Not so many, but like, so I
all
would,
the plants, but also, yeah.
yeah, so I would say Tulsi or holy basil
Mm.
is probably one of my, yeah, soul plants, as well as rosemary actually.
Uh-huh.
So I would say those two really come into my life all the time. And For an example, like in regards to rosemary, I sat with this plant very early on. I felt really called to it. And there was a part of me that was like, it's rosemary. I have it in my cupboard. I use it like whatever, I was like, what's so great about this herb? But when I sat with it, I had this really amazing download of this elder woman who had this long, beautiful gray hair. And she wasn't anyone specific in my life, or at least not that I know of consciously. And yeah, just this beautiful experience of feeling held and feeling comforted by this energy or this person. And realizing after the fact of just kind of processing that, realizing like this herb is so much a part of my DNA and part of my ancestral line that did something for me. It felt
Mm.
like this plant was in my blood and bones, and I didn't really know much about it, like other than some of its like medicinal properties, but like in regards to kind of the ancestral lines, until I really started looking into it, I'm like, wow, all this actually makes sense, like why I feel so drawn to this herb. And so yeah, I mean, right now I don't have it grown, but I've lived a lot of places, and a lot of times rosemary is there. A lot of times I'll just pick some sprigs and keep it by my bedside. And um, I think that plant really called in this knowing of plants and our relationship to plants outside of just our current human experience, like it was a beautiful reminder for me that like plants, regardless of where you come from, regardless of where you live, where your ancestral lines are from, we have had relationships with plants medicinally for as long as human existence. And I think that for me that was so powerful, because it's not just this woo woo thing. It's this deep biological story that we have living in us. And again, that just kind of sparked more inspiration in in the herbalism world for me. But I'm so grateful and thankful for that experience sitting with rosemary.
Rosemary is also one of my soul plants. It's probably the first one that I remember really connecting with. Like, I always kind of thought my first experience was with dandelion while I was living in China at the
Mm,
beginning of my degree. And like, dandelion is so woven into life there.
yeah.
So you see all of the grandmothers and the mothers out there with their baskets picking dandelions all morning when they're in season. But actually, when I thought back, it was rosemary, and I've been, enjoying rosemary focused foods for as long as I can remember, like rosemary potatoes,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. But then started like making these rosemary cookies,
Mm,
which I still make now. And people have messaged me and said, like, I still remember you making these when you were like, 15, and like bringing them to a party as you do. I mean, I had no hope. I was always, I was always going to work with the plants. But like I still make that recipe now, and
yeah.
or like a variation of it. But it's probably my go-to plant. Like, I always work with rosemary for protection, and
Yeah.
I love it with incense and
Yeah.
just lots of different ways. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it really, the way that you spoke of the plants just then really shows that relationship building,
Mm,
not in a way just like, oh, I use this plant for this, or I read about them and I feel connected to them, but actually like picking the sprigs and having them beside your bed, and
mm,
sitting with them, taking the time to have a moment without outside distraction to really connect with the spirit of the plant, and integrating rosemary into your daily life in a
yeah.
way that's meaningful and also kind of small in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean, like small
Yeah.
ways that keep you connected with that plant constantly in different
Absolutely.
ways.
Absolutely. Exactly.
So thank you so much for this conversation. I think this was so needed, and I'm really excited to share it with our community here. But for people who are really inspired by your story and your words, and want to engage with you and follow you and support your work, how can they do that?
Yeah, so there's a few different avenues. I have a website, Wildkin Botanicals. that you can kind of search my offerings. I do a lot of one-on-one work, as well as teaching and also support for herb companies in regards to formulation and things like that. You can follow me on social media, on Instagram _wildkin. And I think that's a lot of teachings, but also more of, philosophical conversations around herbalism. And yeah, I'm going to be launching a program here soon via online, which I haven't really come out to say too much, but I guess this is the point, or
Surprise!
in which it's going to start. But I'm really excited for that. So you're more than welcome, if you're curious, to get on my email list through my website or through my social media platform, and connect further.
That's so exciting. Congratulations. I can't wait. We'll definitely share that when it's released.
Thank you.
And I'll be sure to put all of your info in the show notes so people can easily find it as well. But I share your stuff on Instagram all the time on my Herbalist page, so I'm sure people are probably familiar now with kind of like your tag, because I fangirl over my favorite herbalists. And also, can I just say, your website is beautiful. I had a nice, good little mosey through it the other day, and it's stunning.
Thank you. I actually, this woman, Jess, in California, helped me with it, who is actually linked on my website as well. But I think that collaboration with her was, I'm glad I did it. I'm really happy with it.
It's gorgeous. Now everybody needs to go and have a look, so you can see what I mean. But thank you again so much, Dana. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I just really look forward to seeing how this conversation is able to ripple out in its own way and inspire and motivate other people to get involved with mutual aid. And hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, it's a term that people will know when I mention it in conversations. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. And to anyone who is curious, please don't hesitate to reach out, even if it's just for conversation. I love herbalism and the world and all the connection pieces. So if this speaks to you, don't hesitate. I love chatting about herbs.
Thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Your support means the world to me, and if you have a free moment and would like to leave a review, a comment, or a rating on your platform of choice, that would go a long way towards helping me to grow the podcast and reach more people. If you aren't already subscribed, check out my Substack newsletter. Over there, I share lots of free resources, as well as an option to join as a paid subscriber, which is another beautiful way you can support my work. May what you've heard today guide you in living a little more slowly and a little more connected.